Space exploration was humanity's last frontier, a desperate grasp for survival and meaning among the stars. But no one could have prepared the crew of the Aurora 7 for the incomprehensible horror that awaited them upon their return home to a planet that was no longer their own. Chapter 1: The Return Home. The stars glimmered like scattered diamonds in the vast blackness of space as the Aurora 7 slowly approached Earth after a grueling 7-year exploratory mission to Proxima Centauri. Inside the spacecraft, Captain Elias Kane sat in the command chair, his gaze fixed on the blue-green orb growing larger in the viewport. The sight of Earth stirred a mixture of longing and relief in his heart. "Oh, God, it's beautiful," whispered Dr. Olivia Reyes, the ship's xenobiologist, leaning forward as if she could reach out and touch it. Her voice was thick with emotion. 7 years in space had taken its toll on the crew, and Earth had become more a distant memory than a tangible reality. "Beautiful and alive," said Lieutenant Dorian Vance, the navigator, his hands gliding over the controls. "Landing trajectory locked. We're right on course for re-entry in T-2 hours." Captain Kane allowed himself a rare smile. "Let's bring her home, team." The crew had faced the unknown for years. Alien anomalies, cosmic storms, the loneliness of the void. But their ordeal was almost over, or so they thought. As the Aurora 7 drifted closer to Earth's orbit, the calm was shattered by a blinding flash of light. It was sudden, ferocious, and all-consuming. The light engulfed the spacecraft, making the crew shield their eyes instinctively. The ship shuddered violently, its systems screaming alarms as warning lights flared across the control panels. "What the hell was that?" shouted Vance, gripping his chair as the ship trembled. "Unknown anomaly. Massive energy surge," yelled Dr. Caleb Grayson, the ship's physicist, his fingers flying over his console. "We're losing power. Systems are shutting down." The ship began to spiral uncontrollably. The artificial gravity flickered, and the crew floated briefly before being slammed back into their seats as the emergency stabilizers activated. Outside, the viewport showed a bizarre distortion. Earth's surface rippling as if it were water, colors bleeding into one another like a broken kaleidoscope. "We're being pulled in," Kane barked. "Brace for impact." The Aurora 7 plummeted, its hull screaming as it tore through the atmosphere. Flames licked at the edges of the viewport, and the world became a blur of orange and red. Then, with a deafening crash, the spacecraft smashed into the surface below, skidding violently before coming to a halt in a cloud of smoke and dirt. Chapter 2: A World Out of Time. Silence. Kane's ears were ringing as he pried himself from his harness, his body aching from the impact. The cockpit was dimly lit by flickering emergency lights, and the air smelled of burnt metal and scorched electronics. "Roll call," he croaked, coughing. "Is everyone alive?" "I'm here," Reyes replied, her voice shaky but determined. "Vance reporting, barely," the navigator groaned, nursing a gash on his forehead. Grayson grunted from the floor, his glasses cracked but still intact. "I think I broke something, but I'm alive." The ship's hull had been breached in several places, and the instruments were dead. Kane activated his suit's oxygen supply before prying open the cockpit hatch. The door hissed open, revealing a landscape bathed in a strange, golden light. As he stepped outside, Kane froze, his breath catching in his throat. Towering trees stretched skyward, their trunks thick and gnarled, covered in moss that glowed faintly in the dim light. Giant ferns and vibrant, alien-looking flowers spread across the forest floor. The air was heavy, humid, and alive with an unsettling symphony of unfamiliar sounds. Deep, guttural roars in the distance, high-pitched screeches from unseen creatures, and the rustling of immense bodies moving through the underbrush. Reyes stepped out behind him and gasped. "No, this can't be. This isn't Earth." "It is Earth," Grayson said grimly, clutching his side as he joined them. "Just not the Earth we know." The ground trembled beneath their feet, and a deafening roar split the air. Kane turned just in time to see a massive creature emerge from the jungle. A Tyrannosaurus Rex. Its scales shimmered in the sunlight, its amber eyes fixed on the crew with predatory intent. "Back inside. Now!" Kane shouted. The crew scrambled back into the ship as the T-Rex charged, its thunderous footsteps shaking the ground. The creature slammed into the wreckage, its teeth gnashing inches from the cockpit window. Its roar was deafening, primal, a sound that seemed to echo through time itself. "Is that a dinosaur?" Vance stammered, his face pale. "Looks like it," Kane said grimly, "and I don't think it's happy to see us." Chapter 3: Survival in the Past. The first few days were chaos. The crew of the Aurora 7, space explorers trained for the unknown, found themselves in a situation no training could have prepared them for. The prehistoric Earth was both beautiful and horrifying, a living, breathing nightmare teeming with life forms that were at once familiar and alien. The wreckage of their ship became their sanctuary. It was damaged, leaking fumes, and only partially functional, but it was the only protection they had from the dangers of the world outside. Captain Elias Kane was quick to establish priorities, assess their situation, salvage supplies, and find food and water. "We'll need a perimeter," Kane said, standing near the gaping hole in the hull. He gestured to the jungle beyond, where the faint roar of a distant predator sent chills down their spines. "Anything that size could rip through this ship like paper. We can't let them get too close." "How do we do that?" asked Dorian Vance, the ship's navigator, who was still clutching his bruised ribs. "We're engineers, not cavemen. I doubt we can just scare off a T-Rex with sticks and stones." "Maybe not," muttered Dr. Caleb Grayson, hunched over the remains of the black box. "But we have scrap metal and engineering know-how. If we can rig the ship's power core to run a low-voltage electrical fence, it might keep the smaller creatures at bay." As Grayson spoke, a loud screech echoed from the trees. The crew froze, staring at the dense vegetation where something enormous moved in the shadows. For a brief, terrifying moment, they could see the glint of an eye the size of a dinner plate before the creature vanished. Kane swallowed hard. Work fast. The next 48 hours were a blur of frantic activity. With only hand tools and salvaged materials, the crew built a crude defensive perimeter around the ship. Sheets of reinforced plating were torn from the spacecraft's interior and hammered into makeshift barriers. Grayson managed to repurpose a damaged capacitor to electrify the perimeter, though the range was limited. Reyes worked tirelessly on another front. As the ship's xenobiologist, she ventured into the jungle with Vance to find food and water. The forest was an overwhelming riot of color and sound, with creatures that seemed to be hybrids of prehistoric and alien forms. They found fruit that resembled mangoes, though Reyes hesitated to call it edible until she ran tests. Vance, gripping a sharpened piece of metal for protection, muttered, "This feels wrong. Like, this shouldn't exist." "Nothing here should exist," Reyes said, her voice quiet but resolute. "But we're alive, and that's all that matters right now." Her tests confirmed the fruit was non-toxic, though its texture was strange and gelatinous. "It'll keep us alive," she told the others, placing the fruit on a makeshift table in their camp. "But we'll need protein too." Kane nodded grimly. "We'll hunt if we have to." Over the following weeks, the crew fell into a precarious routine. By day, they scavenged for food and water, cautiously exploring the jungle. They quickly learned to avoid certain areas: the watering hole, where enormous sauropods and carnivores clashed daily, and the forest's northern edge, where strange noises hinted at something even larger than a T-Rex. One encounter stood out vividly in their memories. It was midday, and Reyes had just returned to camp with a bundle of fern-like plants she was certain could be used medicinally. The ground began to tremble, a rhythmic pounding that grew louder and louder. Kane was the first to spot it. A pack of raptors, their feathered bodies gliding effortlessly through the underbrush. Their eyes gleamed with intelligence, and their claws clicked against the rocks like knives against glass. "Inside! Now!" Kane shouted, grabbing Reyes by the arm and dragging her toward the ship. The crew barely made it inside before the raptors attacked, their slender bodies slamming into the metal barriers. Sparks flew as the creatures tested the electric perimeter, shrieking in frustration. One of them jumped onto the ship itself, its talons scratching furiously at the hull. Reyes watched in stunned silence. "They're coordinated. They're hunting us." "Then we hunt them first," Kane growled, his expression hardening. That night, the crew devised a plan to trap one of the raptors for study. Using the ship's dwindling energy reserves, they set up a motion sensor that would trigger a cage made from salvaged plating. The plan worked, though not without cost. Vance was nearly killed when another raptor ambushed him from the side. He managed to escape with only a deep gash on his shoulder. The captured raptor was both fascinating and terrifying. Reyes examined it from behind reinforced glass, taking samples of its blood and tissue. "Its biology isn't purely Earth-based," she said, her voice tinged with awe. "There's something alien about it, as if the creatures here were influenced by something beyond natural evolution." Her words only deepened the crew's unease. What had really caused their crash? And why did this prehistoric Earth feel so wrong? Chapter 4. The Revelation. The breakthrough came 3 months after the crash. Grayson had been poring over the ship's damaged systems, trying to extract data from the black box. One night, as the others slept, he bolted upright in his chair, staring at the monitor with wide eyes. The anomaly that had struck the Aurora 7, the blinding flash of light that had thrown them into this prehistoric nightmare, was no accident. It was a signal. Grayson called an emergency meeting, his hands trembling as he displayed the data on a salvaged tablet. "This energy signature, it's not natural. It's structured, like a message." "A message from who?" Kane asked, his voice low and tense. Grayson hesitated. "I don't know, but the signal came from Earth itself. Or at least, something on Earth." Silence fell over the group. For months, they had been struggling to survive, assuming they were the victims of some cosmic accident. Now, the horrifying truth began to dawn on them. Someone or something had brought them here deliberately. Reyes leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "If it's a message, can we answer it?" "I'm working on that," Grayson said, though his tone was far from confident. "But we're running out of power. If I can't get the reactor back online, we'll lose what little tech we have left." Before they could discuss further, a low, vibrating hum filled the air. The ground beneath their feet trembled, and the sky lit up with an eerie, pulsating glow. The crew rushed outside, their hearts pounding. Above them, the triangular alien craft descended, its surface smooth and seamless, as if it had been carved from a single piece of obsidian. It moved with an unnatural grace, defying gravity as it hovered above the jungle. A beam of light shot down from the ship, sweeping over the wreckage of the Aurora 7 and the terrified crew. For a moment, they felt weightless, as if the light itself was scanning their very atoms. Then, a voice, a deep, resonant tone that seemed to bypass their ears and echo directly in their minds. "You do not belong here." The words sent chills through their bodies. The light grew brighter, and the jungle fell eerily silent. As the crew watched in stunned horror, the ship began to descend, its immense shadow swallowing the camp. Kane stepped forward, his fists clenched. "What do you want from us?" There was no answer, only the oppressive hum of the alien craft. The hatch began to open, releasing a blinding light that engulfed everything in its path. The last thing Kane saw was the silhouette of something emerging, tall, impossibly thin, and utterly alien. And then, darkness. The crew of the Aurora 7 had survived prehistoric Earth, but their true ordeal was only beginning. What force had brought them here, and what did the alien visitors want? For now, the answers remain hidden, waiting in the shadows of time and space.